OK, here are your newspapers on this Monday morning with Conservative Home columnist Emily Carver and the Olympian Kriss Akabusi. Kriss, I'd like to start with this trans swimming situation, which the world governing swimming body, FINA, have voted through a new policy blocking trans competitors from events unless they completed their transition by the age of 12. So if they went through male puberty, they will not be allowed to take part in female races.
Yeah, and it's not before time. I wonder why we've been sort of beat around the bush with this. If you go to a playground and you see boys and girls when they're 8 and 9, girls are often as strong, as quick as the boys in many of the events. But you go to a playground and see boys when they're 14 and 15, and there's quite clearly a difference in strength and endurance and in power and in speed. So you take that on to world-class performers where you're at the top of your game and you've got young ladies who've worked really, really hard to represent themselves, their families and their nation, all of a sudden having a lady who's transitioned after the age and has got all of that strength, dexterity, broad shoulders, smaller hips, these big muscles, and even when they've had all their pills, it's quite clearly going to be a competitive advantage.
Will we see other international sports federations following what...
They're going to have to, aren't they, eventually? Because you've got the Olympic Games, and at the Olympic Games you're going to have all of these sports competing, and if swimming has a different criteria to everybody else, that'll be a little bit odd. So I suspect at some stage everyone's going to have to fall in line. I know Sharon Davies has been a lone voice for a very long time, battling in the wilderness, but it looks like her sport have listened to her, and I suspect quite quickly other sports will follow.
OK. So let's talk about the rail strike then, and it's over all the front pages today. Emily, what's your take on this? You go to The Guardian.
Yeah, so The Guardian are sort of laying the blame at the foot of the government for refusing to take part in what they call last-ditch efforts to halt the rail strikes. And, it's a strong line. People might agree that the government should sit down and negotiate with these unions. The government is saying, though, that it's not for ministers to sit down in those negotiations. It's for Network Rail, which, of course, is actually government-funded. My view is that ministers are probably right not to sit down because you're giving a lot of power to unions. Yesterday I was talking to Stephen Pound, who's a former Labour MP, who said the RMT are known for being particularly vicious and quite bullying and not open to negotiations. So to me it seems like negotiation in this case may well mean accepting all of their wants and desires. And what we've got to remember is that revenue in the trains, revenue in the railways is still 80% what it was before the pandemic. Meanwhile, costs have risen. So I think there needs to be a little bit of self-awareness from some of these union chiefs and these union members that actually is pretty difficult for everyone at the moment. And you were talking about hospitality. They're saying that hospitality could be hit, £1 billion. I mean, that's a huge amount. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've had events cancelled this week. They're going to be postponed or just cancelled forever. So that's so much money that we're losing.
What are the other options then? If it isn't strike action, negotiations aren't gaining that traction.
Well, it's difficult, isn't it? Because most people in this country can't just say that they're not going to turn up to work, can't threaten their employers in that way.
But this group can.
This group can, but I just worry that what they're asking for is just far too much at this time. There just isn't the money to afford this. And I don't know what the government should do. They could bring in what other countries in Europe have, where they have minimum service obligations. They could go the whole hog and ban strikes. I don't think I'm pro that. I think that these unions do have a right to strike. But I think perhaps there should be a little bit more introspection, a little bit more self-awareness at this time, because inflation is hitting everyone.
Except we hear that teachers, NHS staff, the legal profession, post office workers will all be polling to see if they should have industrial action this time.
Yeah, I mean, we saw yesterday on Saturday at those cost of living protests that absolutely everyone and their dog were there. You had Unison, you had the BMA, you had the teaching unions, you had all sorts, refugees welcome, the EU flag waving, you had every cause. And what binds them, in my view, is that they're very much against this government and have been for a long time. All the placards were Tories out, etc., etc. They're trying to use their collective power, in my view, to make a political protest as well as one about the rising cost of living.
Yeah, look, we have had a consistent challenge of our economy now since the global financial crisis. And a lot of the constituents we're now talking about have seen their pay in real terms cut by 30-40%. We had austerity from 2008 right up to the Brexit 2016. And then we've had what we've gone through in the last couple of years. Striking is a very British way of insurrection.
And
now,
French.
Yeah, now I would warn everybody with their strikes, because there's already been mooted the summer of discontent, and that was the headline in the Mail, and throw back to the 70s. Now, the 70s, the miners had a great strike and a bad result. And what ended up happening is that although there was a lot of sympathy to start off with the miners, the whole country then turned against them. And the mining industry, along with the steel workers, along with the shipyard workers, were absolutely obliterated. And so my concern here is that this is a fool's trap. Go into this insurrection, and in the end, automated services and digital IDs and all that will come online, and the jobs will be lost forever. So now, have I got the answer? No, I haven't got an answer.
But do you support the strike action?
I understand the strike action.
You understand why they're striking, but do you support the fact that it's going ahead this week and that we may have more from teachers, the NHS, barristers?
Do I support... So, yeah, I understand. I do support the workers saying, you squeezed all the juice out of us and now it's just the pips. I understand that. My fear for them will be that eventually they will lose their job.
The problem is that they're rejecting reasonable savings that are going to be in place. You know, the government has suggested perhaps a £1 to £2 billion package of savings, which would mean cutting down on some jobs. The ticket offices, reducing some there, reassessing some routes that aren't used. There are different areas where savings could be made, and perhaps that could then mean that down the line wages do get a boost at some point. But you can't just hold everyone to ransom because you haven't got the pay rise you believe you deserve. Look in the private sector, look at those people working in hospitality. Sure. They're hardly well paid and they've taken the hit time and time again. They weren't taxpayer funded, throughout the whole pandemic.
No, but on the other hand, they're looking at, we've found money for Ukraine. We found money for the COVID and all the expenses that were spent throughout COVID. And it always appears that when we are in crisis, the government find money and the money goes upstream. But these guys are saying, we've done our bit. We lived austerity for you. We can't take any more. And it's, I've got water. I haven't got worried about my heating. I've got that in my house. But what is it really, really like? Really, really like if you are working 50 hours and getting paid 30 cents.
But what's frustrating is a lot of these people were ones who were very happy to have the lockdowns and, indeed lobbied the government to keep lockdown measures in place, from the BMA, from the teachers' unions, etc., etc. I do think the government has a bit of a hostage to fortune with the amount of money they've spent over the last couple of years because people think that can continue.
Well, Margaret has got in touch to say, they do not affect me, but this is outrageous. They're holding us to ransom for more money. They refuse modernisation, efficiency changes and other things that people in the real world have to deal with. So, Emily, a similar point of view to you there. Shall we move on to another story? And front page of The Telegraph, Emily, is the police and what's happening if you get burgled.
Well, this is terrible. I mean, I don't know if you've been burgled in the last few years, but people anecdotally know that nothing really happens. You just go and get your number, that you can get your insurance paid out. But this kind of this story in The Telegraph puts the data to the amount of burglaries that are actually solved, and it's not looking good. Police have failed to solve a single burglary in neighbourhoods covering nearly half the country over the past 3 years. The worst is Sheffield, which has gone 3 years without any of its 104 burglaries being solved. And I imagine there were more burglaries than that, but people just didn't bother going to the police because they thought that it wasn't going to happen. And then this is another one that people can point to cost savings from the government and say, more money needs to be pumped into the police. Every single department, it seems, needs more and more money, and I'm just worried where this money is going to come from. Some voices in this article are saying that the fault lies at the door of the police in terms of its priorities, where its priorities lie. They're not committed to resolving these crimes anymore. I don't know. I don't work in the police, so I don't know exactly what it's like on the ground, but it may be a combination of not enough money and resources and also bad priorities and management within the system. Because this is not good. This is a horrible crime, being burgled. It's not a minor crime, in my view.
I was invited to go and see Surrey police at work this week, and I did that, and I went to see them in Staines. And it was very, very interesting, very interesting. Lots of things I wouldn't divulge, but it was interesting to see what they have to put up with. But however, they cut a long story short. One morning I'm on my way into work, 4 a.m. in the morning, and my car's pulled over to the side by 2 police officers who just want to make sure it is my car and I am the owner of it, whatever, which I think is fair enough. But when I put that on social media and I praised these 2 young officers for what they did and how they handled it and how they explained this to me, because there is a very large rise in car thefts in the area that I live. The criticism from people, how dare they pull you over, how dare they stop you, how dare... Preventative stuff like that, I mean, I don't think people can have it both ways.
Were they looking for a particular... Did you fit some kind of profile?
Description.
You look a bit dodgy that day.
Fat Irishman.
Were you driving some amazing supercar?
Yeah.
Ah, OK, well, yeah, they had to check.
It wasn't a super.
This guy doesn't look like he can afford this car.
But you see,
Did you not find that a bit of a grievance?
No,
that would really irritate me. This is why I understand why people get so annoyed with stop and search.
I praised it and I said, absolutely brilliant that they did that, and they were worried about who was driving this car, what it was doing at that time of the morning, going to a certain place. I thought it was fine. Listen, I grew up in Northern Ireland where police can stop you for any reason whatsoever. You're sort of used to it.
Yeah, look, I think the police, again, it's a very, very tough job. And as a police officer, or you could be called to a road traffic accident 1 minute, a domestic violence the next minute, be going to a mum and say your son's dead the next minute. There's so much stresses and strains. And unfortunately, burglary is down a pecking order compared to some of the other things that our police officers are asked to deal with. And yes, Eamonn, I've had exactly the same experience in a lovely Chelsea tractor driving to a West Ham game and pulled over by a jam sandwich and just made sure, is this your car? Oh, yes, Mr. Akabusi, just making sure because lots of cars are disability. So, yeah, we've all been there. And it's a good thing for our generation, because in the end, you've got nothing to hide, nothing to worry about. But if you're a younger male, I know a lot of black people, black guys, and, are getting stopped all the time. It might be a little bit more grating, but at my age, I do appreciate they're doing a job.
Okay.
My parents have had their car nicked 3 times out of their drive, just on the road. Crazy.
Okay.
No.
We were going to do that one. We were going to do that once.
One ended up in the north somewhere, I can't remember, Sheffield. One ended up in Tottenham, and another one I don't think was found.
Yeah, that's
gone
abroad.
abroad.
That's what gone abroad, yeah.
Insurance through the roof.
Yeah. Where are we going next, Emily?
Well, should we just look very briefly, front page, Kriss, of The Guardian. There is this wonderful picture of Dame Kelly Holmes. She says, sometimes I cry with relief. They've done a feature on Kelly Holmes on coming out.
Yeah.
For you reading this, how did you feel?
So Dame Kelly is really interesting. Dame Kelly was my Lance Jack, a Lance Corporal, when I was in the army.
Was she?
Yeah, she was my Lance Jack, yeah. And
she higher rank than you, or lower rank than you?
No, I was a high rank than Dame Kelly. I'm a lower rank now. But no, in fact, she was a driver. It was driver Holmes. I just come up from the mid-games in 84. Anyway, I want to get the story, but I just come up from the games in 84. Driver Holmes slams the tabs in. Hi, Q, because I Q my side. I'd like to get back into athletics. I used to be a young athlete, blah, blah, blah. And the rest is history. I feel so sorry for Dame Kelly. I mean, she said she's doing it for her. She wants to just to come out. But she had to keep it quiet. I mean, I'm not surprised. Many people were surprised. But it's not about me being surprised. It's that she feels she needed to have to tell people. She said she was scared that she's going to be outed while she was in the army, and that she's always had to introduce her partners as her PAs or friends. So good luck for her. Everyone's going to be happy for her. It's just so sad in 2022.
Gosh, if I was her partner, I wouldn't want to be introduced as her PA.
but that's what she had to say.
Yeah.
She had to introduce them as a PA. She could never actually say, actually, I'm in love with this person.
Yeah.
And it's a tragic story, but it's come good now. So well done, Kelly. Like everybody else, we're happy for you.
Some of her words are really, really touching. She said, I'm nervous about saying it. I feel like I'm going to explode with excitement. Sometimes I cry with relief. The moment of this coming out, I'm essentially getting rid of that fear.
Yeah, and like the army have had the equal opportunity since the year 2000. So, you can be gay and be in the army. And I've been at army events and I've seen same-sex couples holding hands, etc. So, but she's felt up to this date, she's not been able to come out and say that, my best friend and lover is another woman. Well, good luck to you.
Kriss, thank you ever so much. Emily, the same to you. You'll be back in the studio with us in about an hour's time to go through the papers.